The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon and good morning, depending on your location. I'd like to welcome everyone to the ASDWA webinar, where we're launching our new PFAS source water protection guide and toolkit. I'm Alan Robertson. I'm Executive Director of ASDWA, and again, would like to thank you for attending this webinar this afternoon or morning, depending on your location. Next slide. So I just want to give one slide here about ASDWA for those that are maybe not heard of this organization. Our members are the Drinking Water Program Administrators and the 50 states, 5 territories, the Navajo Nation and DC. So those members provide oversight of the public water systems through ensuring compliance with the regulation, technical assistance, reviewing the plans and specifications and things like that, and then funding through the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund. We coordinate with multiple partners. A key partner is EPA. We consider ourselves co-regulators with EPA, but we also coordinate extensively with the other state environmental associations such as ACWA, ECOS, ASWAMO, the air associations, and others. We also coordinate with the water utility organizations. And again, our mission is really to protect public health and the economy through provision of safe drinking water. We serve as a bridge between our members and the folks in DC. Next slide. So again, the purpose of this webinar today is to showcase our newly developed guide and toolkit. This was a new effort by ASDWA since I took over 3.5 years ago. We're trying to develop reports, white papers, resources, and tools to fill unmet needs. We have a whole series of white papers and reports on our website. We have a resource page, a reports page, and this is one of our new ones we want to try and showcase today. And what we're trying to do is to demonstrate and share effective strategy for addressing PFAS contamination risk in source waters. PFAS has exploded as a drinking water issue in the last 2, 3, 4 years, and we want to try and provide this tool as a way to prevent the contamination, to keep PFAS out of the environment. And the idea is that, at a state level, it will help inform policy decisions. In other words, help inform actions that may or may not be undertaken, provide a way to assist in that analysis, and then assist the state drinking water programs and other organizations in protecting public health, and hopefully encourage collaboration and communication between these local and state organizations. Next slide. And again, we have a PFAS work group that's been very active on writing comment letters to EPA. And again, we have a lot of states that are either in the process of setting their own standards or setting cleanup levels or trying to determine if any actions need to be taken at all. And the idea is this will help them investigate these sites that have potential impacts to the drinking water supplies, and then understanding the broader scope of potential PFAS contamination within the states. And again, this is a tool for many people, many parties. We want to help the state primacy agencies. Clearly, those are our members. That's our mission. But we want to help out the water systems. We want to help out the communities to update their source water assessments and their maps to prioritize locations for PFAS monitoring and sampling. In other words, can you get a better idea of where your sources might be potentially upstream and do appropriate sampling? And then you would do a more detailed investigation and think about remediation based on known uses of PFAS in the industry that might be upstream and the potential pathways for fate and transport. Next slide. As usual, we do this on all our projects. You want to have state input. We have a small staff at ASDWA, 6 people, including myself. We're headquartered outside of DC, so we need people that are what I call boots on the ground. They're in the weeds of working on these issues. They understand the details. They understand the needs at the state and local level. So I want to say thanks to the 9 states that were on our project advisory committee and then we had many more that provided examples of their PFAS efforts. So there's several states on here. There's also several states that are not on here that are still in the midst of trying to address PFAS contamination in their states. Next slide. With that, I'm going to turn this over to Ashley from Cadmus to talk about housekeeping and start in the detailed presentation. Take it away, Ashley.
Thanks, Alan. And really thank you to the whole ASDWA team for having us on the webinar today. We'd especially like to thank Deirdre White, who was the project manager for this effort, this toolkit, and really a phenomenal partner throughout this project. We at Cadmus are really appreciative of the opportunity to support ASDWA in developing these materials, and we hope you'll all find them useful in your current and future efforts. So first off, thanks for joining us live today. We have over 300 people joining us on the webinar today, and the webinar will also be recorded. The recording will be posted on ASDWA's PFAS webpage in the coming days for anyone who is unable to attend live. I'm Ashley Reyes with the Cadmus Group, and I'm joined by some of my colleagues, Alex Taylor, Andy Somar, Mackenzie Weber, and John McDonald, all who you'll hear from today about the development process for each of the products that are included in ASDWA's new PFAS source water protection guide and toolkit. All of those materials, all the toolkit materials we talk about today, are available on ASDWA's PFAS website already. So if you haven't had a chance, we would encourage you to view, download, and consider how the guidance and the tools that we'll be showcasing today could complement your existing source water protection efforts. Feel free throughout the course of the webinar today to submit questions for our presenters. We'll be using the chat and questions box to monitor questions, and then we'll have a designated Q&A session at the end of the webinar. With such a large group today, we may not get to all of your questions, but we'll do our best to identify common questions or requests and prioritize getting through those first. Quick overview of our agenda for today. We'll be providing a brief overview about the project background and process, just building on what Alan just shared with everyone. And then we'll also walk through each of the major toolkit components, which are the technical appendix, a mapping guidance, and decision support tool, to explain what each resource contains, how they were developed, and the primary uses and benefits to state drinking water programs, environmental organizations, associations, and other partners. As Alan mentioned, ASDWA initiated this project to support states and other partners in different stages of investigating sites with potential for detection of PFAS compounds and understanding the scope of potential PFAS contamination within their state. The goal of this project really was to provide information about possible sources and actions that can be taken by state primacy agencies or source water protection programs to improve source water protection from PFAS contamination. And since states are in different stages with developing and implementing policies and programs that address PFAS, we determined that it would be best to focus on how states could best learn from each other's actions, successes, and lessons learned. And because there is this wide range of current efforts and looking into vulnerability of particular sites, a lot of information is coming out about PFAS contamination. We also wanted to have a focus on developing really user-friendly tools that were accessible to states and partners at different stages in understanding, identifying, testing, and taking action to address source water vulnerability and possible PFAS contamination. And this resulted in the newly launched toolkit, which we're showcasing today. The major toolkit components include a 70-page technical appendix, a mapping guidance document, and an Excel-based interactive decision support tool. We'll also share some additional resources that were developed under the project to supplement and enhance these three main components. Before we dive into each element of the tool, we just wanted to quickly highlight the importance of the state's involvement in developing these resources. As Alan mentioned, the PAC members provided guidance, resources that we use to develop the tool products, and input throughout the project lifecycle for the technical appendix, our mapping guidance, the decision support tool, and other products that we'll talk about today. In addition, the first major effort of this project was actually a state survey that we conducted last July, where information was collected from the states directly about their existing programs and policies related to PFAS, and specifically PFAS and source water protection. That input ultimately ended up being the core of our state summaries, which you'll hear more about from Alex when he discusses the technical appendix, and the tool database, which Mackenzie and John will showcase later on today. The project took about a year to complete from kickoff to this webinar launch, and the products were greatly benefited, all of them, from the involvement of the PAC members as well as the states who participated in submitting to the state survey and then reviewing state profiles before the products were finalized. So now I'm going to pass it off to Alex, who will provide a walkthrough of the technical appendix process and key uses.
Thank you, Ashley. You could go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So the first product developed under this project is the Technical Appendix. This document is a 70-page PDF that's available on ASDWA's PFAS page. This document is an appendix to the decision support tool. So all of the content in the decision support tool, which you will hear more about in a little bit, is contained in this technical appendix. It contains 3 main sections, 2 of which are general informational sections, and 1 of which is specific to the states. And these are on the chemicals of concern, PFAS in the US, and then state profiles. So next slide. So these sections are, the first 2 sections of the technical appendix are chemicals of concern and PFAS in the United States. These sections are a valuable resource for anyone who wants to know more about PFAS. They synthesize key information and summarize what we know so far about the PFAS group of chemicals. Chemicals of concern is more scientific or technical information about the chemical and physical properties of PFAS chemicals. It discusses toxicity and fate in transport, as well as the PFAS chemicals that are currently being monitored for under UCMR 3, and it also makes recommendations for expanded monitoring programs, and it lists other chemicals in the group that states probably should be monitoring for based on their toxicity and the way they behave in the environment. The next section is PFAS in the United States, and it's similar. It provides a brief history of the uses of PFAS and how it's been regulated in the US. The uses section also contains a special discussion about PFAS and firefighting foams, which some states are working to address. It provides an overview of the PFAS life cycle from production to waste treatment and eventual possible exposure pathways. And it also has a list of North American Industry Classification System, or NAICS codes, and I'll talk more about that in a little bit. But briefly, these codes classify businesses by their type of economic activity. And so we have a list of codes that are relevant to monitoring for PFAS pollution. So the topic of PFAS can be overwhelming because it is so broad, but these 2 sections of the technical appendix provide an easy to digest crash course in PFAS. They're by no means comprehensive because the body of research is vast and it's growing all the time, but they distill a lot of information into a succinct introduction to PFAS. So it's a really good resource for anyone who is new to the subject, who maybe knows some of the scientific or chemical information, but doesn't know how it's been regulated or is looking for more information about how it's monitored. So these sections provide enough background to understand and make use of the state profiles, which we will take a look at now. If you go to the next slide. So the third section of the technical appendix are state profiles, and they make up the bulk of the document. These profiles provide a breakdown of activities that states are taking to address PFAS. So the purpose of these profiles is for people to learn about what other states are doing about PFAS pollution, and to maybe take a look at what neighboring states or similar states might be doing to address the problem. Here you can see an example profile, Alabama. It's the first one that appears in the document. Each state profile follows the same format. There are 2 to 3 key takeaways at the top. You can see those bullet statements. These are to make it easier to browse through the document and quickly see whether you might be interested in what the state is doing. So it's just a quick look at what that state's program is like, so you can tell if it's something you're looking for or something that strikes your interest. And underneath the key takeaways are expanded descriptions of each of them that provide more context. And then at the end of each profile, there is a table of resources with links to more information about the state's program. So usually the things that are talked about in the descriptions are then linked in the table of resources at the bottom. So you go to the next slide. So we developed the technical appendix, as Ashley mentioned, starting with a survey that we distributed to the states in the summer of 2019. This survey was developed using Cadmus's own PFAS expertise and also using initial materials that were provided by the PAC. And the survey was distributed to all the states, and it asks a series of questions about what states are already doing about PFAS from both a regulatory and a monitoring and a cleanup standpoint. And then it also asks questions about what states would want more information on in the future. We received 29 responses to the survey, and 27 were included in the technical appendix because those states had programs that were already actively addressing PFAS. So we then developed the state profiles using the survey information. We shared the profiles with states for feedback, and that took place in early 2020, so January and February. So the information in the appendix as of now is current through early 2020, but like Ashley mentioned, there will be opportunities for states to submit updated profile information to ASDWA for later versions of this technical appendix. And then the additional sections, chemicals of concern and PFAS in the United States, were developed to supplement the state responses. And for these sections, we really wanted to capture a broad look at the state of PFAS research. So we used academic literature, and we use information from organizations like the Interstate Technology and Regulatory Council, the Agency for Toxic Substances and Disease Registry, and the US EPA. And then we also relied on Cadmus's own fate and transport experts that we have in-house. So next slide. So I just wanted to highlight a couple key aspects of the technical appendix that I think will be particularly useful. First is that it's a master list of resources. So everything included in the decision support tool is listed in the technical appendix. So it's useful if you just want to browse through all of the resources available to gain a broad look at what's being done about PFAS in the US. So each of the resource list tables that I mentioned earlier, and you can see an example here, each resource is categorized by type. So there's case studies, there's standards and regulations, there's maps that states have put out about pollution, so like displaying PFAS data geospatially. There's sampling plans, there are test results and information about certifying laboratories to test for PFAS. So each resource is put into one of these categories and then linked, and then we provide a little description. So if you're looking for just some case studies about what states have done at particular sites, you can browse through the document just for case studies, or you could browse through just for maps, for example. So we've tried to make it as useful as possible for anyone looking for a particular type of program or type of information that they want. So that's just the list of resources I think will be useful, but you can also go to the next slide. So then, as I mentioned earlier, we provide a table of these NAICS codes. So NAICS codes are useful for identifying the locations of businesses and manufacturing sites that might be involved in the pollution of PFAS. Each of these codes is tied to a specific type of manufacturing process or economic activity. And because PFAS is produced or used in specific manufacturing processes. These codes can be used to look for facilities that might be using PFAS or putting PFAS out into the environment. So if you're looking for sources of possible pollution, then using these codes could be helpful. And Andy might mention this a bit more under the mapping guidance, but they're useful for that purpose. This list is compiled from states who have already been using NAICS codes as part of their sampling plans or monitoring plans. So we tried to amalgamate a list of every NAICS code that's been used. So hopefully this will be useful if you're looking to identify possible sources of PFAS pollution. And broadly, I hope that the technical appendix is useful for anyone trying to learn more about PFAS or just learn more about what they can do as a state program to address the problem in the United States. And with that, I will pass it off to Andy to talk about the mapping guidance.
Thank you, Alex. Next slide, please. So the mapping guide was developed to help readers who are interested in using GIS data to complete a screening level assessment of source water vulnerability to PFAS across a state, county, or other area. The guide begins by presenting a general framework for assessing source water vulnerability to PFAS and is followed by descriptions of potential data sources to use for the assessment. And like the other resources described today, the mapping guide is available for download on the ASDWA website. Next slide, please. So this slide displays the source water assessment framework that is outlined in the guide. The approach starts with defining the purpose and goals of the assessment. So this means making clear and specific decisions on which source water types are to be assessed and the geographic area of interest. Step one also involves clearly defining the desired outputs of the assessment and intended application. So are you looking for a detailed vulnerability ranking for all of the source waters included in the assessment, or kind of more general groupings of high versus low vulnerability source waters? Step two is to then map the source water locations that are selected for assessment. Map layers of groundwater wells, surface intakes, source protection areas, etc., are typically maintained by state drinking water programs. Step three involves mapping potential PFAS sources. So these could include locations that either produce or store large quantities of PFAS, facilities with PFAS detections in wastewater effluent or air emissions, or known locations of PFAS release, such as firefighting foam application sites. The goal here is really to identify higher risk locations for PFAS exposure to the surrounding environment. In step four, PFAS monitoring data are mapped to identify source waters with and without detection. This step could consider ambient water quality monitoring data from surface and groundwater, or samples from treated drinking water. Source waters with PFAS detections obviously can be readily classified as vulnerable and prioritized for follow-up monitoring, analysis, and management. In step five, watershed and aquifer data are mapped to identify areas with higher risk characteristics for transport of PFAS into source waters. So high risk characteristics could include areas that are prone to surface runoff and erosion, or areas with shallow groundwater or high rates of groundwater recharge, etc. Step six pulls all of the information together from the previous steps to classify the vulnerability of the source waters in your area of interest, and to then identify priority source waters for next steps in management. I'll point out here that detailed methods for this and other steps will very much depend on the specific goals, resources, and data available for an assessment. What we've tried to present here is a general outline for a source water assessment that can be expanded upon and customized. Next slide, please. The remainder of the mapping guide describes potential data sets that could be incorporated into a source water assessment. These are primarily national data sets maintained by federal agencies, but some example state and local data sources are also described. This slide summarizes the data sets listed in the guide for mapping potential PFAS source locations. One I'll highlight is the US EPA Facility Registry Service, FRS, which is a database of facilities that are subject to EPA regulations and permitting. The FRS stores the NICS code of each facility within the database, and so those are the same NICS codes that Alex just described, and can be used to map facilities that are producing or handling products like waterproof fabrics, nonstick coatings, etc. Next slide, please. Here are key data sources listed in the guide for PFAS monitoring data. The water quality portal combines water quality monitoring data from the EPA STORET data warehouse and the USGS National Water Information System. The data available from the water quality portal are primarily collected from surface and groundwater wells. The EPA UCMR database includes monitoring data for several PFAS compounds sampled from treated and untreated drinking water. And of course, state databases of drinking water, surface water, groundwater samples should be reviewed along with any state or local sampling efforts that are specifically targeted at PFAS. Next slide, please. So here are example watershed and aquifer data sets that could be used in a source water assessment. We've divided these into 4 groups. Data on the surface water network and watershed boundaries provide information on flow pathways, flow directions for the transport of PFAS in water. These can be used to identify surface waters that are either adjacent to or downstream of PFAS sources. Aquifer boundaries can highlight groundwater supplies that are more vulnerable to PFAS contamination, such as aquifers that underlie PFAS source location. Land cover data can be useful for identifying areas that are more prone to surface runoff and erosion. And soil and geologic characteristics, physical attributes of soils like bedrock, like permeability or groundwater depth, along with chemical attributes like organic matter content, all affect the movement of contaminants, including PFAS and surface runoff and groundwater. The mapping guide includes a list of national data sets in each of these categories. We also include a link to EPA's DW Maps, which is an online mapping tool designed to help update source water assessment, and includes many of the watershed and aquifer data sets described in the guide, along with some of the data sets for PFAS sources. Next slide, please. So just a few take-home points for the mapping guide. For those asking, where do I start with a source water assessment? The guide offers a framework for key steps to complete to characterize PFAS vulnerability and to identify priority source waters for monitoring and management. The guide includes descriptions and links to national data sets that can serve as a starting point for the assessment, along with examples of state data sets that can be used to supplement and enhance those national data sources. And the guide includes the same list of NICS codes that Alex mentioned is in the technical appendix is also included in the mapping guide itself, which can be useful for, again, identifying potential PFAS sources. So now I'll pass it over to Mackenzie to introduce the decision support tool.
Thanks, Andy. Next slide, please. Great, so next I wanted to transition into the communications fact sheet and decision support tool. So first we'll discuss the fact sheet. So as we were discussing the decision support tool and what other information would be useful for state drinking water personnel, the pack provided some input and mentioned that communicating with industry can be difficult to navigate, especially regarding PFAS source water contamination. So because of this, we created this communicating with industry fact sheet and decision guidance document. It has a few different sections that I wanted to run through today. So the first, it provides some background information on working with industry, especially for PFAS contamination. Next, it guides the user through a series of questions to help them actually walk through, thinking through how they're going to communicate and work with industry. This is a fillable PDF, so the user can actually input their answers into the fact sheet directly and record their answers for reference later. The screenshot shows this on the right side. Lastly, it contains some best practices to keep in mind when actually approaching and working with industry. So this is a useful, quick reference guide to actually start taking action and communicating with industry. So if you're looking to work with industry for PFAS contamination, we recommend checking out this document. Next slide, please. So next, moving on to the decision support tool. We will do a live demo of this shortly, but I wanted to give some background information first before we jumped into that. So this is an interactive decision-making tool that helps to provide guidance to state drinking water personnel for addressing PFAS contamination. So to actually use the tool, it has two separate search engines shown in these two screenshots here. In the first screenshot on the left, you can see that the user answers a few questions, and the first question that they'll answer is they can indicate what aspect of PFAS they would like to learn about. They can choose between PFAS basics, locating PFAS, testing for PFAS, and then actually taking action. If they select taking action for PFAS, then it gives them another list of specific actions that they could learn more about. One of those actions is outreach and communication efforts. So if you read the fact sheet for working with industry and communicating with industry, but you would like to learn a little bit more information about this and see some examples from other states, I recommend using this search here. And John will show this later. The next search engine that the user can use is shown in the second screenshot. So for this one, the user picks the specific document types that they would like to learn about. You can choose between things like case studies, fact sheets, or state websites. So if you're looking to develop any of these types of documents, this is a great place to start. Additionally, the user can search here by specific types of PFAS contamination. So if you would like to learn just about firefighting foam caused contamination, or industry or consumer products or waste caused contamination, you can use this search function here. So if you already know what the type of contamination that you're dealing with, this is a really useful tool to get some specialized results. Lastly, you'll see at the bottom of both of these search engines, you can prioritize your information by state. So if there is a state in your region that's working on PFAS, you can prioritize their state there to see their actions. That might be a good guide for you to then take those similar actions if you're working on similar contamination. This is optional, so you don't need to do this if you would like to just see all the entries and don't want to prioritize. So based on your selected entries, your selected criteria based on those two different search engines, it then generates a list of useful information for you. So some of this information generated may be some actions and policies that other states have taken that may be useful for your own state to use as a guide if you're looking to take similar actions. It also contains some information from national organizations such as ITRC or US EPA who are working on PFAS on a national scale. The information that is found in this tool, as mentioned previously, is all sourced from the Technical Appendix, particularly the state summaries, as well as the mapping guidance document that Annie just discussed. So after we looked at the Technical Appendix and mapping guidance all the way through as a bigger picture, we worked to categorize this information into an easy-to-use format. As Alex showed, we use the key resources table to organize that information in the mapping guidance document. So this information fit into these main categories that actually formed the search engines that we're using in this decision support tool. So this is just a basis of where this information in the decision support tool actually came from. Next slide, please. So lastly, we created a decision support tool update form. So we understand that PFAS is rapidly changing as it's a ever-changing issue. So because of this, ASDWA has said that they will periodically update this tool. So to do this, we created a user-friendly update form for state drinking water personnel to use to continue to build up and update this decision support tool. So after you explore the tool some more, and if you see some information that you would like to add based on your state's PFAS actions, or you'd like to update existing entries, you can contact Deirdre to get an example of this form to use as an update form for the decision support tool. And now on to John for the live demo.
Thanks, Mackenzie. I'm just gonna change presenters over to John to kick off our demonstration.
Thanks, Mackenzie. For the next 15 minutes, I'd like to walk through the decision support tool, walk through some of the functionality of the tool, demonstrate its use, and point out some key features. And then as time allows, I'd also like to run through a few different scenarios for how you can use the tool to select resources about PFAS contamination. So beginning with the home screen of the tool, we'll start on page 1. So this is the home screen of the tool, and this gives an overview of the tool's layout and format, and describes the 2 search engines that Mackenzie mentioned earlier. So as a reminder, the tool is broken into 2 key search engines. The first is searching PFAS by topic of concern, and the second search engine allows users to search PFAS by certain document types and PFAS contaminant sources. Throughout the tool, certain key terms are used, and if at any point users are interested in looking at the definitions of those terms, they can always go to the tool definitions page at the end of the tool. And lastly, on this home page, there are hyperlinks to allow users to view the other resources that we've discussed during this webinar, such as the technical appendix and mapping guidance, and also provides instructions for users to submit new resources to the tool. Some other features that I'd like to point out about this page is that our 2 search engines are color-coded in the bottom tabs, and that's how they're color-coded on this home tab. So the PFAS topic of concern is going to be the blue tabs here at the bottom, and searching PFAS by document type or contaminant source are going to correspond to the green tabs. And finally, another key feature of this home tab and throughout the tool are hyperlinks, which will allow users to jump to particular sections of the tool. So for instance, if I wanted to begin on the first search engine, filter resources by PFAS topic of concern, I simply click on this hyperlink and it'll take me to the corresponding tab. That said, you can also simply click on the tabs at the bottom of the tool like you normally would in an Excel file. And this is an Excel-based tool. We chose Excel because it's easy to use and widely accessible. And we think it was the best format for consolidating our research into an easy-to-use search engine. So let's begin by going into one of the first search engine. We'll start with filter resources by PFAS topic of concern. Once again, I'll click the hyperlink. This will bring me to the first search engine. And you'll notice that the search engine, as Mackenzie mentioned during her presentation, is broken into 2 parts. The first part is allowing users to select PFAS, which topic criteria that they want to search the resources by. So there's 4 selections here: PFAS basics, and this will yield resources that are related to state websites, fact sheets, and guidance documents. Locating PFAS is the second criteria, and this is related to PFAS mapping examples and industrial codes to identify sources. Testing PFAS is the third criteria, and this is related to laboratory certification standards, water quality testing techniques, and testing requirements. And finally, taking action to address PFAS. You can select any one of these criteria by simply clicking in this blank circle on the tool. And for this first search engine, only one selection is allowed. The caveat to that is if you select taking action to address PFAS, you'll be prompted to select further sub-criteria for selection. So let's start by selecting taking action to address PFAS. We'll first begin by selecting that. It prompts us to go to part 1B, and this leads to further actions. And in part 1B, we can select multiple criteria to search by. And these include interpreting results, establishing drinking water standards, creating state action plans, cleanup efforts, proactively reducing further contamination, creating partnerships, and outreach and communication efforts. So as you'll notice, we went ahead and selected a couple of these sub-criteria. And you do that by simply clicking on the drop-down menu and selecting yes. So let's select establishing drinking water standards, cleanup efforts, and creating partnerships. After the criteria are selected, you can choose to sort by states. This is an optional sort. So if you want to search resources that are specific to your state, you can, or search resources specific to a state you're interested in researching, you can do so by selecting from the drop-down menu. Please keep in mind that these are only states that we currently have resources on file for. So this is not a comprehensive list of all states and territories, only states and territories that have associated resources throughout the document. So let's go ahead and select Pennsylvania. And finally, we can submit the search criteria to query our database to give us back resources that meet these criteria. And the way that these selection criteria work is that the resource needs to meet at least one criteria of the sub-criteria listed here. So let's go ahead and press submit. This will take us to the results page. Keep in mind, we can also go to the results page by just clicking on the tab below. So looking at the results page, we'll start by walking through what we're seeing here, starting at the top. So first, you'll see your selected criteria, taking action to address PFAS, establishing drinking water standards, cleanup efforts, and creating partnerships. And next, you'll see the definition of one of the sub-criteria that was selected. This is just the first sub-criteria that was selected. Because of design constraints on the screen view, only one definition is displayed here. And this note to the right alerts the user of that. And if at any point you're interested in, for example, seeing the definition of cleanup efforts or creating partnerships, you can simply click the hyperlink to view tool guidance and definitions at the end of the tool. And this will take you to those definitions. So let's go back to our results page. Continuing down the page, at the bottom, we have the results from our query. So as you'll see, resources are organized by resource and link, state, and a brief description. The hyperlink is functional in this tool. So if you're interested, all you need to do is click on this hyperlink and it'll take you directly to the resource in question. As you'll notice, as selected on the previous page, the resources are organized by state. So in the previous page, we selected Pennsylvania, and now we'll see that Pennsylvania is at the top of our search criteria here. And finally, there's a brief description of each resource. Another key result that I want to point out is that this database also contains national resources. So national resources are any resources that we considered that would apply broadly across states. And these are mainly resources that are put out by EPA, ITRC, or ASDWA. Please keep in mind, though, as Alex mentioned earlier in the presentation, that this is not a comprehensive list of all national resources. We know that the body of research around PFAS is it's a large body of research, and this mainly captures national resources that are listed in our technical appendix. And finally, resources are then sorted in alphabetical order by state. So beginning with Alaska in this example and going forward. So these are all of the resources that fit the criteria that we selected on the previous page. So let's go back up to the top of the page. If at any point while using the tool, you decide that you want to go back and change your criteria, you can simply click on the previous tab, or also use this hyperlink to view to return to the question. So let's return to the question and select different criteria. We'll deselect the sub-criteria that we selected. Although this is not necessary, you don't need to deselect these criteria, but we'll just go ahead and do that anyway for consistency. And let's change to selecting testing for PFAS. Scroll down. And let's take a look at a different state and see if we can get any results for, say, Utah. So we've changed the criteria. Once again, we can either press submit or just simply click to the next tab. Either will work. This takes us to the next tab. And as you can see, we have a different set of criteria querying the database here. And we have Utah appearing at the top of the search results. And you can go back and do this as many times as you'd like. Before I move on to the second search engine, I'd like to point out the last feature of this of this tool that we encourage you all to use is that these results can be printed into an Adobe PDF format. And there's some high-level instructions for how to do that at the top right of the results page. Just simply click File, Print, and set printer to Adobe PDF. And this will export a PDF file for you in case you want to share these resources with anyone else in your office. Great. So let's move on to the second search engine. You can do that by clicking the tab at the bottom. And let's say that we're interested in looking at resources by document type and source of PFAS contamination. So I'm going to reset all the search queries. Start us off with a blank view. This is how the tool will appear when you receive it. So this search engine is broken into two parts. The first part is related to searching PFAS by document type. And you'll see we have multiple document types listed out here: case studies, drinking water standards, fact sheets, full state PFAS profiles, government actions and regulations, government reports and contamination, laboratory certification programs, PFAS contamination maps, state websites, and water quality test results. And additionally, we have a second search engine by looking up PFAS by source of PFAS, looking up resources by source of PFAS contamination. And we have 4 sources of contamination criteria listed here: firefighting foams, industry, consumer products, and waste. Important to note, there is a difference between this search engine and the last related to how it queries the database. So this search engine, similar to the first, if you select multiple criteria in part 1, so let's go ahead and select case studies, fact sheets, water quality test results. This first engine works as an inclusive search engine. So as more criteria are selected, more results will appear. And that's because the result only needs to meet one of the criteria selected in part 1. However, if users choose to also fill out criteria in part 2, which is optional, then this will begin to limit the number of results that they see, as resources need to fit at least one criteria in both search engines. So each search engine individually is an inclusive search engine. The more criteria you select, the more results you get. But when search engines are combined, the resource needs to fit criteria in one of both search engines. So in the second search engine, let's go ahead and use that one as well. We'll select firefighting foams and consumer products. And down here at the bottom, we once again have the option to sort by state, territory, or national entries. But for this result, let's actually just go ahead and leave that one unchecked. That's also an option if you're just interested in seeing everything that's out there. There's no reason you need to start off with a particular state. So once again, we'll press submit, and this will take us to the results tab. And coming to the results tab, you'll see something very similar to the previous search engine. Your selected criteria, and you can note here that the selected criteria, the 2 search engines have an and in between them. This is just reinforcing the fact that criteria need to be met in both search engines to be listed here. But otherwise, the tab is essentially set up the same, beginning with national entries and then going into entries in alphabetical order. This tab can also be printed as a PDF if users are interested in exporting the results of their search queries. And similar to the previous engine, at any point we can also go back, return to the question, and change our search results. So let's actually deactivate the searching by PFAS source of contamination. And let's change some of the criteria that we're selecting up here in the top search engine. And let's only look for resources that are about state websites or PFAS contamination maps. So running the results one more time. And just like that, similar to the first search engine, very easy to go back, change your criteria, and export this page for new results. And the final aspect of the tool, which we viewed once, but I'll go back to one more time, is at any point you're interested in how we define these search criteria, you can always go to the definitions tab towards the end of the tool. So that concludes the tool demonstration portion of this webinar. And with that, I will pass it back to Ashley.
Thanks, John. And thanks to everyone who provided these updates today. Thanks, John, for leading us through that demonstration of the decision support tool, and our other presenters for showcasing the key elements and uses of different products included in the toolkit. As a reminder, again, the toolkit and all of these materials that we've been talking about are available on ASDWA's PFAS webpage. The exception to that is the update form, which if you have an update for the tool, a new entry or an update to an existing entry, you can reach out to Deirdre White at ASDWA to get a copy of that form. We're gonna turn over to our question and answer portion of the webinar now. We'd like to open it up to questions. If you have a question for any of our presenters and you haven't done so already, please go ahead and enter your question into the chat box. You'll find that on your GoToWebinar control panel. There'll be a little bar that says chat. You can expand that and enter a question, or chat/question. You can expand that, enter a question for any of our presenters, and we'll be moderating a session here for any questions that do come in. We've received a couple questions already, so we'll get started with those first. This is, I'm going to direct this question to Alex. We had a question come in asking for clarification. Are the NAICS codes, and so those would be the codes that were referenced both in discussing the technical appendix and the mapping guidance, are those for facilities that have the potential to discharge PFAS?
Yes. The NAICS codes are for facilities that have the potential to discharge PFAS based on the processes that they use or the type of business that they're engaged in. So every commercial or industrial building is categorized under one of the codes. In the NAICS code list that we've included in the technical appendix, we list the 6-digit codes and then their associated facility type. So that list includes things like fabric mills or upholstery manufacturers or firefighting training facilities, etc. You can use databases such as EPA's Facility Registry Service to search for the locations of possible PFAS dischargers using those NAICS codes. So they're just a way to quickly filter out possible businesses and locations that aren't likely to use PFAS so that you can get a look at the locations of places that might be discharging in your state. So they act as sort of a filter in order to more easily find possible sources.
Thanks, Alex. I hope that was helpful and fully answered that question. We have received a couple questions about the tool and updates. So that update form is available. And I'm going to pass this over to Mackenzie to discuss ongoing efforts.
Hey, yep, Ashley, would you mind going back 2 slides for me?
Sure.
Perfect, yep. So yeah, I just wanted to clarify. So ASDWA will be planning on updating the forms, updating the support tool. You can use this update form to provide updates to ASDWA if you have any. You can contact Deirdre White if you'd like a copy of this update form if you have any updates to add. So ASDWA is planning to collect the update forms and update the tool periodically. The exact cadence and of these updates will depend on the amount and frequency that the updates are provided. So if you have any, please contact Deirdre to get a copy of that form, and it can be updated.
Thanks, Mackenzie. We did receive a question. I think if you're having if anything that you're seeing in the resources looks different from the demonstrations or the materials, I would recommend reaching out to Deirdre and somebody can get back to you to troubleshoot or figure out if there's something something that's just not loading correctly in your system. So for the tool itself, if anybody is not seeing entry forms that look like this, please reach out individually. And we have another question that's come in. I'm going to direct this to Alex again. Alex, can you address, are wastewater treatment plants included as sources in the technical appendix? And feel free to loop Andy in if necessary for the mapping guidance as well.
Yes, they are. So the technical appendix discusses wastewater treatment plants for anyone who's not familiar on how they discharge PFAS. But so we have some narrative description just for more understanding about them. And then they are also included in the list of NAICS codes. So they count as an industrial activity, and there are codes for hazardous waste treatment, non-hazardous waste treatment, landfills, combustors, incinerators, septic tanks even, or just waste collection sites. So there is a whole group of codes that you can use to search for wastewater treatment plants. And hopefully that helps, but Andy can chime in if you have any additional questions on wastewater treatment plants.
Yeah, I will just add that the mapping guide, in addition to NAICS codes that would be relevant to wastewater treatment, the mapping guide does include a link to EPA's GIS map layer of wastewater treatment facilities, and then also monitoring data that's collected from those facilities.
Great, thanks Alex and Andy. And we have a follow-up to that. How about municipalities as sources?
Municipalities themselves would not be included in the list of codes, but local facilities would be. So local waste treatment or local like municipal dumps, those would be included.
Great, thank you. And a question for Andy. Is there any way to know, oh, I'm sorry, is the map created with this tool importable to GIS as a shapefile layer?
So the mapping guide, itself does not create any kind of files. The mapping guide is narrative text describing how one would go about kind of doing a source water assessment, and then links to data sets, many of which are in shapefile format. Yes, the guide itself is not providing a map. The guide is providing links for a reader to go and download those map layers onto their own machines and kind of running the analysis from there.
Great, thanks, Andy. And now we have a question that's come in about, a couple questions come in about the tool. When installing the tool, do users need to enable macros? Have issues been reported where firewalls have not allowed the downloads? John, can you address the macros question, please?
Yeah, sure. So the tool was designed without macros, and it was done specifically so that it would be easy to get past, or that states could use it without having any firewall issues, states and EPA, any kind of government employee. So we did design it keeping in mind that it should be accessible to the government audience. So we don't anticipate any firewall issues, and there are not macros. But again, if there are any technical issues experienced with the tool, we do encourage you to reach out. It might be something more related to your computer that could be easily resolved.
Thanks, John. And we've not been receiving reports of issues so far. So as John said, if you do have an issue, please reach out. It could be related to an older version of Excel as well, since there are no macros enabled. So just keeping an eye on questions coming in here. If you do have any more questions for any of our speakers about any of the products that we've been talking through today that have not already been addressed, please reach out. Please chat those questions in into the box, and we are reviewing and pulling those questions together to respond. We just had a question come in. Are we going to be able to download the tool from the website? Yes, you should be able to download the tool from the website now. So all of the materials that were presented today for the technical appendix, mapping guidance, the decision support tool, and the communications fact sheet, those are all currently available on ASDWA's PFAS webpage, and the tool is available for download from there. So you'll download the tool and then be able to use it on your desktop, as John was displaying using it on his during the demonstration. And just as a reminder, if you do have questions, to chat those in. We are monitoring questions through the chat log today. Okay, we have a question come in, another question come in about the tool, asking if the results from the tool were calibrated with the database. And Mackenzie, if you could respond to that about how the database was built up, and sort of just building on what you had covered before, please.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. So the information that is displayed in the actual support tool is based on the information that we gathered in the technical appendix, particularly the information that came in from the state summaries, so the input that states provided back in June on their PFAS efforts. Additionally, we included information that was present in the mapping guidance document, and then we also included some of the national information that we use to write up the sections, such as the chemicals of concern and PFAS in the US that are in the technical appendix section. So that's where some of the national entries from work such as ITRC and EPA came from. So yes, all the information is in the technical appendix and the mapping guidance, but also displayed in the decision support tool.
Great, thank you. And we have a follow-up to that on a question about what the tool covers. So is the tool covering various state standards for perfluorinated compounds other than PFOA and PFAS as well?
Yes, yeah, there are multiple states that are working on different PFAS chemicals other than PFOA and PFOS. So you can search through the database and see other examples of work that's being done on the full body of PFAS chemicals as a whole.
Great, thank you. And there is information about different compounds, perfluorinated compounds, included in the technical appendix as well in the chemicals of concern section, where you can view additional information about source water protection related concerns and risk and vulnerability specific to different perfluorinated compounds. Another question about the tool updates. So the tool will not be updated every time that there is an update. those updates will be coordinated and based on how frequently updates are being provided and the number of updates, ASDWA will determine how frequently it makes sense to update the tool. So thanks for all of these questions about tool updates, and really the updates to the tool and future versions will really be driven by the input that's received from users like all of you who have joined us today. We have another question. Is there ongoing effort to get states that did not submit responses to submit responses? There's not a current effort to get states who did not submit responses to add. However, as John was showing, the tool was built with those state prioritization options in the dropdown for the 2 different query forms. And as additional resources are provided by states that did not submit originally or did not have active programs at the time that the survey was conducted, as they are added to the tool, those states will be added to that dropdown, and the state's information will be added into the databases as they're provided. And then we have another question that came in about the tool and how the tool, what the benefits of the tool are compared to a more general query or search. The information that was provided by the states in their surveys, a lot of the description information and some of the information that they provided in their survey results is not necessarily organized in this way on this way on their websites or in a way that can be accessed as we have it here with the descriptions for each particular survey and the link to it. So this is really an amalgamation of the input that we received from the states and that was used in the state summaries and in the tool to try to organize content into categories and in a way that would be most useful for states and other organizations that are in these different stages of identifying, locating, testing for, and then taking action to reduce their risk of source water contamination from PFAS. So it's really taking a more deliberate lens to the information that's available, as well as expanding and providing these descriptions that are cultivated specifically based on the information that the states provided, some of which is not publicly posted, not posted directly on their websites. We'll give people another couple minutes to write in any final questions that you have about the tool. And as a reminder, the materials are available up on ASDWA's website. We have the link up on the screen right now where you can access the materials at www.asdwa.org/PFAS. And if you have any questions about the tool that we did not address today, or as you start downloading the materials and working within them, if anything comes up, you can feel free to contact Deirdre Wright, and we will we'll provide some support as we'll get back to you, or we will discuss. And then we have just one more question that's come in. Does the toolkit go through QA/QC? It did go through QA/QC, and all of the states that provided information did review their state profiles for what was ultimately used to develop the toolkit. Okay, well, thank you everyone for attending today, for attending the webinar and for your interest in the newly launched PFAS source water protection toolkit and guidance. We encourage you to go to ASDWA's website, download the materials, and take a look at how they can complement the efforts that you're already undertaking to address the risk of PFAS contamination in source water, and to add to your source water assessments and integrate this information as much as you can, as much as it can be useful to complement your existing efforts.